So again, welcome to the Merlin Chronicles. I see on my page here that I've put Merlin's Chronicles, and the book is technically the Merlin Chronicles, but oh well, it's the same book. So here we begin with the natal chart of Merlin of Galatane, 9/15/363 AD at 5:85 a.m. on the Isle of Man. I have a purring kitty on my lap, if that's what you hear. So this was compiled by Ed Nowak, who's the same person who did the natal chart based on my birth time, the birth times I gave him for Yeshua, Jesus, and his baptism, those two charts. So here he is doing the chart for Merlin, and he knows it's Merlin. I gave him that information, and I gave him the date for it. So I'm going to be quoting him directly. And when I make a commentary, of course, I will let you know. In this chart, we find a soul of unique bipolar characteristics. He is at once the warrior joker, the Christ Antichrist. This is indicated on the chart by the 4 conjunctions, 3 oppositions, and the unbalanced T-square. The conjunctions give him the ability to synthesize energies from manifestation, and the oppositions give him the awareness needed to commune with the inner realms and thus understand his mission. The moon exalted in Taurus and conjunct the Pleiades assists him in transmuting desire into aspiration. Thus he has the ability, or had the ability, to literally rebuild the form nature and motivate it in a different way. Here he realized his inner spiritual being and the identification with his own soul. He used his intuition to make helpful contributions to whatever he pursued. He was always in a position to lead or take advantage of others' dependence on his insight, and he could demonstrate phenomena. The conjunction of the moon with the Pleiades bestowed honor and glory on him. Now I might pause here to say that when I'm reading this, keep in mind both the young Merlin that I've been telling you about here, and also the Merlin of the Arthurian time, which is given to us in legend, and some of it is true, and some of it is metaphorical, and some of it is maybe not true at all. But most of it, I believe, that is brought down in these stories are based on ancient texts and are either highly metaphorical but true, just having a metaphorical polish on it, veneer on it, or basic facts. Now, the Merlin of the younger years and the Merlin of the Arthurian time, here we find his bipolar nature a lot, because I don't mean he was actually bipolar like schizophrenic, but you know, the bipolar nature of his being, 2 poles of experience, expression. Because he literally switched gears, shall we say, between that one earlier part of his life and the later part of his life. Now, the later part was built on the foundation of the earlier, so they weren't entirely separated, but there was a real difference in how he planned and worked in his life. And this was intended, and he was preparing in his earlier period for the later period. So it was all connected and synergistic, but still they were 2 very different periods in his life. Okay, so now I'm going to continue reading here. Soul purpose, Virgo ascendant, and the mutable cross. Here he would have the opportunity to bring the form under the influence of the hidden Christ. In Sagittarius, to practice one-pointedness. In Gemini, to fuse pairs of opposites. In Pisces, let me read that again. In Gemini, to fuse pairs of opposites, and in Pisces, sensitivity to higher impression. The Virgo sun on the ascendant shows him to be a very enlightened soul, capable of spiritual leadership. He was ahead of his time. He was subject to the two extremes of this placement, the excess sexual energy being used creatively or consuming the physical body. Well, this is interesting because you could see the used creatively aspect as his role in genetic engineering, in choosing exactly the mothers of his children that were intended for the path that was set. And, using it excessively, I don't think he actually did that. We make choices in our life, and the charts don't tell us exactly what to do. But you could say that his seduction by Nimu would have been in that category. Even though it was an intended part of the whole picture, I don't know that the actual personality soul aspect of the soul of Merlin realized what was happening until it happened. With 3 planets in Libra, his abilities connected with the use of words is most active. He loved to debate, write, and use reason and logic. Well, according to Thoth, he was an educated man, and he did write the Book of Groves. He is either critical, witty, or clever, humorous. He can be a gentle spirit or sarcastic. He could literally talk himself into or out of any situation. He maintained a sensitive awareness, thus giving him an artistic quality. He tended to support unpopular causes with such finesse and skill that those observing would not realize it was an unpopular cause. He was capable of making real progress and very adaptable to his environment. That would certainly describe the later Merlin, probably the earlier one as well, but certainly the later one. We find with Mars and Pluto in Aries a blend of intuition and initiative, which shows that he developed in mysterious ways. Here in Aries is the great liberator that blends the beginning and the end and dispels time and space. He knew what was planted and what was there to be nourished. He was very daring, flashy, and at times erratic and unpredictable. Yet with the connections of Pluto to Neptune and Saturn, Mercury, he tends toward genius. He is certainly out of place in uniqueness. He displays altruism, mental genius, sympathy, and ego all at once. With Uranus in Leo opposing Neptune in Aquarius and the Sun in Virgo, he had a very discriminating intellect and a sharp mental focus, indicated by the opposition of Pluto with Mercury. This also gave him the precision, exactness, and the inductive reasoning he needed in battle and magic. He had the knowledge of the purpose of matter and used that knowledge in any way he felt necessary. He maintained the power to carry energy from the plane of ideation to the plane of manifestation, Uranus, and at the same time preserve interior control, and from that point proceed to make its ideal object, Neptune, a fact in consciousness and directed intelligence service to the plan. I didn't quite read that last part. correctly, and from that point proceed to make its ideal object, Neptune, a fact in consciousness and directed intelligent service to the planet. Jupiter in the 9th house in Taurus indicates a soul who can learn any subject to which it is attracted. He very likely became sought out for his knowledge. He had no concerns for money, as he was born into wealth. Well, that's an interesting point, because as I state here, the Galatanes were alchemists, so he certainly didn't have any need to beg for money, because he could make it, literally. He had a strong intuition and good judgment. He benefited from his travels and dealings with foreigners. Much wisdom is associated with this position and degree. This degree is commonly known as the degree of the avatar. This is indicative of a certain master of the elements. He could translate wisdom shown by others into a language which could then be made available to others. He knew when to speak and when to be silent. With Saturn in Libra in the 1st house, he was diplomatic and tactful, yet industrious and self-controlled. He needed to learn the lesson of cooperation, and he did. He suffered from a sense of unworthiness early in life. Well, that is possible. Well, certainly is, because, he had this situation where he was taken from his father, and he knew, his mother would have told him very early on the circumstances of that departure. So that could have, in his very, very young stage, affected him in that way. His challenges in the areas of law, sex, and money provided the necessary responsibilities and obstacles. I'm not sure that actually applied to him, but it is possible that in his beginning, when he, started to seek out his power, that could have been, at least in a small way, a part of his life. So to continue, with Uranus in Leo in the 11th house, coupled with Virgo ascendant and Sun, gave him good organizing and leadership abilities. He did not tolerate restrictions and was in a sense arrogant and rebellious. He promoted humanitarian goals. Again, when you're reading a chart, these are tendencies, and he could have, as an illumined personage and one that was layered with those, I imagine he overcame very quickly, or did not even embrace, some of the lesser tendencies. To continue, here in the house of the master, he had material and spiritual sensitivity, the will to rule, and the awareness to carry out the plans of the master. Here, with a sextile to Mars in Aries and the opposing Neptune, he directed his qualities toward and accomplished high goals. Neptune in Aquarius in the 5th house indicates that he needed to resolve past life selfishness. This he also did. With the opposition to Uranus, he could literally manifest what he imagined. Here, Neptune is the master's ashram, the house of hidden karma and the causal body. He made remarkable changes for the betterment of the world. This position gave him a highly impersonal nature. Platonic relationships were evident here. He was probably so dedicated to social or humanitarian causes that he had difficulty in relating to any type of domestic situation. Well, that would certainly have been true. His understanding and capacity for study and serious mental activity is great. He acted in a sudden and surprising way, and was the type of person who was always looked up to. Neptune opposing Uranus, sextiling Mars and trining the moon, esoteric rule of the Virgo ascendant and veiling Uranus provides this soul with a conscious, integrated self functioning with full occult knowledge. With Pluto in the 7th house, he had an intense drive. Here he entered into many spiritual and emotional initiations. This position brought him many major turning points, and he was in danger more than once as he fought devotedly for his ideas, both physically and spiritually. He had many battles of conscience, and he did not compromise. He had many lessons to learn about human motivation. He was a great student of human behavior, which made others listen to what he said. Pluto in this house indicates a very advanced soul whose life was filled with intense experience. I would like to state at this point, and I have made this statement in other videos, but I know little to nothing about astrology. So it is interesting that, given this date, and I certainly didn't look it up myself, time and, all of that, which I wouldn't have even been able to look up. I wouldn't have understood it all, that it comes out this accurately to the type of character we see or think we see in the Merlin image. With the North Node in Cancer in the 10th house, he most likely converted domestic energies into public goals. He had a strong ego and individuality. This position also indicates a father-mother complex or hostilities toward or lack of a mother element. So I put in parentheses here in my own comments, Merlin loved and respected his mother, and leaving her at the age of 13 was especially difficult for him. Although he would return for visits, these were, for reasons beyond his control, few and far between. Well, and also he had this situation with his father. I don't say that's here, but, which I'm sure brought some unresolved feelings into his space that were, I think, resolved when he actually met with his father in the astral later. And, when he remotely transferred his astral body there to the cave and met, or let's see, how did that work? It's the other way around. His father came to him, even though his father was in the time of passing, came to him and was with him at that time. And that's where they embraced. They were actually to embrace and reconcile. But before then, he would have probably have had unresolved feelings. So to continue, with the square to Saturn and Mars, he most likely was in conflict with authority figures. And now we go to the fixed stars. The first one is Mars conjunct Deneb. This position increased any inhibitions and restrictions, both physically and psychologically. 2, Pluto conjunct CHRONICLES. This indicated his popularity with others, but it also shows his revolutionary nature and desire to overthrow. Well, certainly this would have had a bearing, I'm saying, to his placing Arthur on the throne and designing that whole experience and seeing to it that it was put into action. To continue, the third fixed star is Moon conjunct Alcon in Pleiades. Remember, he's Alcon. This bestows honor and glory. The fourth is Midheaven conjunct Bellatrix. This provided him with quick decision-making, thought, courage, and a fighting spirit, the ability to organize and discriminate. In this position, he was led to advancement and success, yet always being surrounded by envy and hate. Boy, I bet that was true, especially in the Arthurian period. 5, midheaven conjunct Capella. He had an inquisitive curiosity. This made him somewhat odd and a joker. Well aspected, it again indicates success in material matters. You know, that's very interesting because when I was receiving from Thoth the information on the younger Merlin, I saw him as, at times he could be, I mean, so serious, and then at times just, uh, humorous, but not slapping on the back humorous. There was a humor with a cutting edge in his, a little sarcasm, just a little touch of it, a drop in his humor. To continue, Sun and Ascendant conjunct the nebula, the next fixed star. This indicates he was involved in tremendously powerful and dangerous events. Example, the rise of Hitler to power and the launching of the Titanic. And certainly he was. 7, Saturn conjunct Algorab. This reinforces the fact of the many delays and restraints placed upon him. This also indicates a fall from power or disgrace of some sort. Now, this would, certainly fit the Nimu and the Crystal Cave scenario. And so this is the conclusion of Edward's chart, but we have some more here. In the book I write, additional insights into Merlin's natal chart was supplied me by astrologer Daniel Giamario. This is transcribed from a taped conversation with him on Merlin's natal chart, which had been cast by Ed Nowak. The following key statements were made by Daniel, and I quote, "A man with a Taurus moon is receptive and beloved of the goddess, bringing spirit into matter. His triple earth, Taurus moon, Virgo rising, Virgo ascendant, is the complete goddess energy. While Taurus moon is esoterically associated with Aphrodite, the Virgo rising and the ascendant are the energies of the high priestess legacy. Merlin's great dedication toward keeping the sacred rituals associated with the old religions is evident. Any man with Virgo rising ascendant must be a servant of the goddess and a man trusted with the inner secrets of the women's teachings. The sun and ascendant are on the star de Nebula at the tip of the tail of the constellation of the Lion, but it also represents, according to the esoteric drawings of the celestial maiden, who is Virgo, the maiden's third eye. This is also known as the Star of the Sphinx. In esoteric teaching, the Sphinx is a monument built to commemorate the passage of the 4 magic points in the sky, the solstices, the equinoxes, as they shift counterclockwise through the zodiac, moving from the maiden to the lion, from one archetypal age to the next. The moon is in the same degree as Alcon of the Pleiades. This point is where all the ancient zodiacs started. With the vernal equinox rested on Pleiades, most of the ancient systems of knowledge were laid down. The solar zodiacs began at this time period. This horoscope in the 3 most major positions, sun, moon, and rising sign, are right at the places that mark transition points from one age to the next. That's my whole sense of what the Merlin transition is. He represents that wisdom that appreciates the mysteries of every age, that link of affirming what is good in all traditions. Merlin's chart reveals his major role in the shifting of the age from matriarchal to patriarchal. So that is Daniel Giamario's statement on it, and it's powerful. I might also add, Merlin's chart so prominently speaking of the star of the Sphinx, and all of this with the teachings, ancient teachings of the Sphinx. Well, this is a very Thothic energy, because when Thoth gave me the information on the Sphinx that I have on Spirit Mythos, it was obvious that it all related to the Thothic journey, you know, the energy of Thoth, the master soul, but also what he represents as a cosmic principle in the earth. And Thoth being overlaid with, one of the souls of Merlin would certainly focus on this aspect even more strongly. And so now I state here in this book, Ed Nowak notes that there are no star patterns, grand trines, grand squares, mystic triangles, or yods in Merlin's chart, which is unusual for a master initiate. So as powerful as this chart is, it is interesting that it is lacking these things. Now, Thoth tells me that the absence of such major stellar configurations is often true for the natal charts of wizards. In the great age of wizards, of which Merlin was undoubtedly the greatest and one of the last, there was always an intense battle between dark and light. This duel of forces was increased by the very power of the master wizards themselves, as they opened the Pandora's box of elemental stirrings, immersing their very souls into the deep pools of birth and death. There were wizards of light and wizards of darkness, and those spellbound somewhere in between. Were a dark wizard to have the natal information of a wizard of light, he might be able to work a considerable spell or magnetic pattern threatening to drain away the light master's life force field. Were the wizard in jeopardy to contain within his chart natal scoring cosmic fields of major proportion, the threat would be greater, for it would cause his power center or atoma to be cosmically oriented rather than earth-grounded. He would therefore be more vulnerable to such spells as they work most effectively through non-grounded persons. Thus, most wizards chose to be born without these stellar aspects. Many of them were conceived in ritual within a cavern where their parents underwent a bonding of that entering soul with the central sun atoma of the earth. This bonding created with the auric physical of the wizard an earth-centered consciousness necessary for this service to nature, and it also imbued him with a shield against much of the negative incantations of the age. Well, wow. My reading this now, and this is the first time I've read it in all these years. I mean, this was long before Harry Potter. This was long before all the books came out and that incredible author penned them. I would assume this was in the 1980s, unless she did it that early. But certainly they were not out there. If they were out there in books in 1987, I didn't know it at all. I never heard of Harry Potter until the movies came out, honestly. Didn't even know the books had been written about it. So, but when you look at this, and I can't even think of her name was now. Is it Jay-Z Knight? Is that her name that wrote the books? I feel that I've always felt since I even saw the movies, because I've never read the books, that she was, akashically inspired. Certainly there's a lot of fiction in those books, but the basis of it was akashically inspired. And now, when I read this for the first time since 1987, or certainly since 1990 something, I don't think I actually read it again since I wrote it, but for a long time I haven't read this, okay? I see so much correlation here. And there were some points. Let's see, what else was I going to speak about here? Well, the nature of wizards themselves, because wizards are not just master illuminaries. There's a big difference between Thoth as Thoth and Merlin. Even though Thoth lent his I'm getting a spell tongue twist here, lent his soul to Merlin. There's a big difference between Thoth and Merlin, because the Thothic energy is very cosmically aligned. The Merlin energy taps the cosmos, no doubt, but it is bringing it down into the core of Gaia. It is really working with the energies and taking it all in, the good and the bad, and daring to bring that darker energy into the spectrum of the workings of the wizard, and yet not be tainted by it, to allow it to become light. So it's just an interesting, it brings up a lot of interesting paths in what a wizard truly was, and a light wizard truly was. And so that concludes all on Merlin's chart. There's just this tiny little piece in the book that I'm going to tack onto this part of the series, because it doesn't really belong anywhere, but I'm just going to stick it here, because the next part that we're going into, it has to do with the extensive notes and commentaries. So this little piece that I'm going to include here is sort of a family tree. It's very sketchy, but it does relate to Merlin's family tree. So we go on the Galatine Hester side. We have Hester has his relationship with, let's see, what do we have here? Just a moment. Let me see. Okay, this is Hester and his siblings. So we have Hester, who married Mary Grace, and the offspring was Merlin. We have Rodini, who married Hammon, and her offspring was Dumar and Block Mir. And we have Abatha, who married Stephan, and the offspring were the twins, Simon of Argyle and Iriba, a female. Then we have Teneman, excuse me, a male, who married Salamda, offspring Amadin and Quinnur and Ormas. So then from Murden, we have Murden who not married, but was with Maria, and his offspring from her was Mercedes Adora, the female, and Heathglorin. And then he also was with Amania, and the offspring was Haybarth. And he was with Rue, and the offspring was Ion. And then we also have mention of Mercedes Adora. And of course, she was with Sukkot, and the offspring was Carmarthen. I can't say the name, Carmarthen. And Heathglorin, her brother, was with Ebenora, and their offspring was Maya, really, M-A-I-A. And this was long before I ever took the name Maya for my own legally. I was Christine when I wrote this. So it's interesting. And she's a female, and the twins were Telechet and Elim. And then we have Ion, which was the half-brother, I believe, of Mercedes Adora, who was took Romella as his mate, and their offspring was Mirith. And then Mirith and Elaine, their offspring was Ban, who was Galahad. Now, it's interesting that so many of these names are just totally out there. You know, I don't see them as related to, certainly not British, possibly Celtic. I don't know Celtic. But these were the names that I received. It would be interesting to see if some of the more ancient tongue, way back, might have been aligned to some of these names. In any case, that's just a little sketchy family relations that I put in there. So this concludes part 3 of Merlin, the Merlin Chronicles. And we will continue with the next one.